Hello and welcome to this Vision podcast. My name is Razia Athman. As the world celebrates World Malaria Day, today on April 25th, we want to amplify the global call under the powerful theme, Malaria Ends With Us. And this is a demand for urgency, innovation, and action to finish what decades of efforts started. While the world has made strides, averting 2 billion malaria cases since 2000, there's still malaria cases killing people, some 600,000 reported in 2023, and Uganda being amongst the hardest hit countries. The disease accounts for 30% outpatient visits in Uganda and 20% of hospital deaths, disproportionately affecting children under the age of 5 and pregnant women. Krystal Birungi is the Field Entomology Coordinator at Target Malaria, and she joins us to spotlight the real challenges and the urgent solutions needed to finally defeat malaria, from rising drug and insecticide resistance to climate-related transmission shifts and major funding shortfalls. This conversation about pushing for action in the fight against malaria is sponsored by Target Malaria Uganda. Thank you so much, Krystal, for joining us today. The World Malaria Day 2025 carries the theme Malaria Ends With Us. What does this theme mean to you? And why is this urgent call to action critical for Uganda?
The theme for the World Malaria Day 2025 is Malaria Ends With Us. I'm somebody who grew up heavily affected by malaria and almost died myself, as well as my siblings, from this disease. And it is very painful that today, decades later, there are still people in the same situation, still dying from malaria. I'm an entomologist, and I've dedicated my life to finding a way to add to the toolbox of what we have available to fight malaria. And this is very critical at this moment because Uganda is still contributing 5% of all malaria cases worldwide. In fact, it is number 3 among 5 countries that are responsible for almost half of all malaria cases in the world. So it is really critical for Uganda that we really engage in this fight. In fact, the theme for Uganda is End Malaria Now, because it is just that important for us.
Despite progress, Uganda still sees high malaria cases and deaths, especially among children and pregnant women. What are the biggest challenges we are facing on the ground?
The biggest challenges that we are facing is that as much as we have these tools available for fighting malaria, over time, we've just seen a slowdown in progress. And this is due to insecticide resistance, drug resistance. These are the major tools we have to fight malaria. But over time, we have found that insecticides that are used to spray the mosquitoes are no longer as effective. Also, the mosquitoes are changing behavior, whereby maybe mosquitoes used to bite people only at night when they're sleeping under the nets. Now you'll find mosquitoes are either biting outdoors or earlier before people go to sleep. That means that people are exposed to mosquito bites in spite of having mosquito nets. Not to mention the fact that there is a big gap in funding. We just don't have enough money to reach malaria elimination with the tools that we currently have. So these are some of the biggest challenges that have been affecting Uganda malaria cases, as well as most recently, the WHO in the World Malaria report has actually revealed that we already have some resistance to malaria drugs, the current artemisinin. We are having partial resistance in Uganda already. That means that it's not as effective treating the malaria that we have got. So all of this makes malaria really a key issue affecting Ugandans.
You've often spoken about drug and insecticide resistance. Can you explain how these issues are threatening our tools and what innovations are there to tackle them?
Yes, absolutely. So insecticide resistance means that over time, what you're using to kill the mosquitoes kind of stops working. And then you have to develop new insecticides. So the major tools we have for controlling mosquitoes include indoor residual spraying, which is an insecticide, as well as insecticide-treated nets, which are supposed to repel or kill the mosquitoes that land on them. However, when the mosquitoes stop responding to these insecticides and remain alive, it means that these tools are no longer effective to protect people. So most recently, recently we have had at least some new generation insecticides that have been developed, which is encouraging. They're using new generation nets. But over time, mosquitoes we've seen will develop resistance eventually. So it is really a fight that's a matter of time. We need to be ahead of the issue. The other issue is that with drug resistance is that medications that are working stop working. So in Uganda, we have seen we had chloroquine that stopped working. We moved to fancy dye, it stopped working. And now we're seeing that resistance to the artemisinin drugs that we're using now. So this is always a challenge with malaria in that the parasite keeps changing and we need to get ahead of it if we're going to achieve malaria elimination.
Could you talk a little bit more about the genetically modified mosquitoes?
Yes. So one of the tools that is promising to add to the malaria control toolbox is genetically modified mosquitoes. In the case of Target Malaria, which is where I work, we are working on developing genetically modified mosquitoes with gene drive. So what this means is we have looked at the mosquito and said, what can we do to help us fight malaria, to reduce this effectiveness of this mosquito for spreading malaria. And we are focused on the fertility of the mosquito. So we have modified the mosquito so that a mosquito, instead of laying 300 eggs, which they do actually, now would lay a lot less eggs, maybe 10 or 15. And then that means that there are less mosquitoes that are hatching that are available to transmit malaria. So that is the key issue we're looking at. However, when you make a change to anything genetically, it only has a 50% chance of passing to the next generation of mosquitoes. So the next generation of mosquitoes, half of them would now again be laying 300 eggs, while maybe half would have your change. And that means it takes time to achieve your end. You have to release a lot of mosquitoes to compete with the ones which are already in the wild, as well as you may need to make frequent releases. So what we have done is we've added something called a gene drive, which is what's unique to Target Malaria. So a gene drive means that instead of only half maybe getting your change, now you'd have almost all of them. That's what we're trying to do. We would want to have over 90% carrying this change, so that over time you need fewer mosquitoes to release and they will still be able to spread your change, and the mosquitoes in the wild will lay less eggs and you'll have a lower population. So our end goal is that the mosquito population size will be low enough that it can no longer sustain malaria transmission. Thereby, if you combine that with the nets protecting people while they're sleeping and the sprays and the medication, it means when you're outside not protected by a net, there are still few mosquitoes to bite you and spread malaria.
So, as a global fund advocacy ambassador, you've seen firsthand the importance of investment. What role does funding play in the malaria fight, and how can we close the $4.3 billion annual gap?
Yes, so funding really makes all the difference in the malaria fight. In fact, since we started it's when the world came together and made this goal of eliminating malaria by 2030 and all the funding started and we had the global fund working. That is when you've seen those over 2 billion infections that have been averted. It is because of that. It is because all this funding has gone in. So from the last funding cycle we have for malaria, we had about 4 billion put into malaria control. And that is why you're seeing that reduction of numbers that took Uganda from 100,000 children dying to, about 12,000 or so, or, between 12,000 and 17,000. So that makes a big difference. That is a huge difference, but we still have a gap. We are not able to achieve malaria elimination with that money. We have seen that there's like you mentioned, a $4.3 billion gap that is just waiting for it's money that is hard to get because obviously funding is declining on the international stage. So it is time to really think about raising more local funds, like us dedicating more money of our health budget towards fighting malaria, because it's a key issue in Uganda. But it also means we need to do more with less. We need to utilize the tools that we have well. So this is going to mean educating people at the grassroots level, use the nets correctly, take all the drugs for your malaria and finish them. Make sure you're tested before you're treated. There are a number of different things we can do to make sure that we utilize the tools that we have well. But it's going to be very critical to continue funding Gavi, that's the Vaccine Alliance, because they will be doing the rollout of the malaria vaccine, to fund the Global Fund, because they are critical to sustaining the tools that we have. Without them, we risk going backwards, back to 100,000 children dying in this country.
Mm-hmm. And we often hear that leadership and community action go hand in hand. What roles can local leaders, health workers, and even family play in making malaria ends with us a reality?
Yes. The local leaders have always been very key, and communities, to ending malaria here in Uganda. In fact, one of the key features of the malaria fight in Uganda are the village health teams. These are people in the community that have been trained through the Global Fund to diagnose and treat malaria. So it's very key that these people are empowered, because then they can empower their communities. We need to empower the women, the children, because they're the key demographic that are affected, to learn how they can prevent and treat malaria. So a local leader, for example, can give this information to his community. They can make sure they keep the community clean, remove any containers that may be collecting water, stop all those ditches that may be around and just breeding mosquitoes, make sure people are using their mosquito nets well, make sure people know the value of a mosquito net, not to misuse it, and to know how the value of its preventing malaria. Because some of these are misused because people don't know that the net is what's stopping their children from dying.
And to our listeners, many of whom may not work in health, what's the one thing they can do today to be part of the solution?
Yes, so malaria affects everyone in Uganda. It really does. So even if you're not in a high malaria transmission area, we know that over 90% of Uganda is at risk for malaria. And with climate change, even the places that are not at risk are now also becoming at risk, and really have to try and find a way to keep ahead of that. So if you are listening today and you're wondering how you can be a part of the fight, spread awareness. That's what World Malaria Day is for today. Tell your neighbor, tell anybody you see what they can do to prevent malaria. Do not pass somebody who is dropping off a container that's going to collect water. Do your part. At the very least, you can clear bushes around your home. You can encourage other people to do the same. You can actually be a part of ending malaria in Uganda.
Krystal Birungi, the Field Entomology Coordinator at Target Malaria Uganda, thank you so much for shining a spotlight to the real challenges and urgent solutions needed to finally defeat malaria. And that's it for this edition of the Vision Podcast. My name is Razia Athman. Thank you so much for listening. For more of Vision Podcasts, you can always log on to www.newvision.co.ug/podcast. And if you haven't already, do download the Vision Digital Experience app.